Moadim lesimcha. It's a pleasure to welcome you to Bevis Marks Synagogue as we celebrate the festival of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. I'd like to share with you today the Succah, the temporary dwelling that we build during this festival. As you can see, it's built here in the courtyard, and it's always been built somewhere outside of the synagogue itself. For many years, it was actually built on the other side of the synagogue, indoors in the building known as the annex, because there we had a mechanical roof that would lift up, and one would be able to put the Succah, the temporary canopy, above still. No separation then between the sky and us in the Sukkah, and then the buildings of the annex would create the walls. Unfortunately, over the years, that mechanical device gave way, and so it was no longer possible to build the Sukkah over there. And so now we have a more traditional outdoor Sukkah on this side of the synagogue. However, still as you enter into the annex, into what was known as the Brandon Sukkah, there still is the beautiful stained glass window depicting the festival. It was a gift of the worshipful company of glaziers and painters of glass to the synagogue, as well as the verse, Harachaman hu yifros aleinu sukat shalomo, may the merciful one God spread his canopy of peace upon us, his Sukkah of peace upon us. And so a beautiful tribute to the festival. Though, as I mentioned, now we build the Sukkah on this side in the courtyard. Now, usually we have a very large Sukkah that fills this entire space, and we're able to have well over 100 people come and celebrate the festival with us. However, this year, during the COVID crisis, with the number of 6 being the limit to the number of people that could be in the Sukkah at any given time, we've built simply a small Sukkah here in the courtyard. But I love the placement of this Sukkah because, as you can see, it's surrounded by buildings. And indeed, these buildings all come from different centuries. The synagogue is from the 18th century. The building behind the Sukkah is known as the Beadle's House, and that's Victorian, from the 19th century. This building over here, more modern, is from the latter half of the 20th century. And then you can see the building just above the Beadle's House is very modern, just completed a few years ago, is of course from the 21st century. And so here in this courtyard, you have this view of 4 centuries of London, an incredible snapshot of the history of this area. And of course, you have the Sukkah down in the middle, which of course we like to think of as timeless. And it really accentuates the extent to which the Sukkah is a dirat arai, a temporary dwelling, as it sits among all these buildings that have been here for centuries. And it reminds us of the fact that our dwellings ultimately are only temporary, that our passage through this life, indeed, all the blessings that we receive can be taken away in an instant, as we've sadly experienced during this past year, and a reminder for us to always have faith in God. And so what I'd like to do is to now share with you our Sukkah from this year, to show you inside some of the decorations, as well as a couple more historic tidbits from inside. I'm so pleased now to welcome you inside of our Sukkah. Our Sukkah has been decorated with fruits. It's the harvest festival, and so all the fruits that we've hung from the Sukkah, from the roof of the Sukkah, are all types of fruits that grow here in England. And so we have apples and pears and plums and cherries and grapes. And it's a way of celebrating the bounty of the harvest. But what we've also done is decorate the Sukkah with historic images of the festival of Sukkot and Simchat Torah from the end of the festival, which depict scenes in different Spanish and Portuguese communities over the centuries. And so we have a number of renderings that are from Amsterdam in the 18th century, as well as some paintings depicting Livorno in the 19th century, particularly around Simchat Torah, as well as a very early drawing of Bevis Marks from the early 1900s. There aren't so many like this, and this is actually from 1908, which I'll show you in a little bit. But I just wanted to take you around and show you some of the different images that we have here, so that even if you can't be here with us in person, you can at least enjoy them a little bit from a distance. So here we have this image depicting the Succah in Amsterdam in the 18th century. You can see what an elaborate affair it was, with lights and with a mirror, and of course just incredibly lavishly done. And so this is a very special look into what their Sukkot would look like. And then just over here, we have another rendering. This one was shared with me by Rabbi Jonathan Cohen, showing Amsterdam in the 18th century with the great Portuguese synagogue over here on the right. And then on the other side over here, you can see these different Sukkots, some of which are even built on stilts, so people could access them from an upper floor. Even if they didn't have a balcony, they could just walk right out onto an elevated Sukkah. And so those are really wonderful. And then we also have over here a scene within the Portuguese synagogue of Simchat Torah, with the Chatanim sitting next to their Shushbin, or the Parnasim of the community. And then making our way over here, you can see the procession that was taking place in Amsterdam, where they would escort the Chatanim, who would be the ones to be honored with the completion of the reading of the Torah on Simchat Torah, and then the beginning of the reading of Genesis, to start the reading of the Torah afresh again, as they would be escorted throughout the city with people leading the way with swords. It would have been quite an amazing sight. And over here we have a beautiful painting from Livorno. I believe this one is kept in the Jewish Museum in New York, and showing the beautiful colors of that synagogue, which was unfortunately destroyed in bombings in the Second World War. But let's move around a little bit more. We'll see some more of these renderings. Over here we have a depiction of the Ho'shanot, the circuits that were done in the synagogue in Amsterdam with the Lulavim and Eterogim during the festival. Beautiful showing of their talitot and their lulavim, with the special decorations that would have been on them, what are known as the rosette, that would have been adorning their beautiful lulav. But the item that I really want to share with you is over here, and here I'm going to set it up to show you more carefully. Over here I have with you something really special. This is a early 20th century rendering of the Sukkah at Bevis Marks Synagogue. Special thank you to Professor Mark Epstein for sharing this with me several years ago. And what you have over here is showing the Sukkah. You can see that it would lift off, so they also had a covering for their Sukkah at that time. The beautiful, elaborate celebration inside of it, and of course the verse of "Ye shall dwell in booths 7 days." And this had been made by the Illustrated London News on the 17th of October, 1908. And it says over here, I'll just read it to you. It says, "The Sukkah outside Bevis Marks Synagogue celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles." And it says, on Saturday of last week, just as this year started on Saturday, began the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, the harvest festival of the Jews. Outside the synagogue were set up sukkahs, small huts, lightly built and hung with branches and fruit, designed to typify the booths of the command, "Ye shall dwell in booths 7 days, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt." And so it recalls the booths that we lived in as we traveled through the desert in the years from when we left Egypt till we made it to the land of Israel. The more Orthodox Jews still look upon the sukkahs as their dwelling place during the 7 days of the feast, and some even erect sukkahs in their gardens, as of course is our practice. But the practice of eating and sleeping in them is falling into disuse. Apparently it become less common for people to eat and sleep in their sukkah. In fact, the first year that I was here in London, I slept in this sukkah. It was very cold, and often the temperatures in England are a bit too cold to really sleep in the sukkah, but it felt nice to be sleeping in the sukkah in the city of London. I don't know when else that perhaps it happened, but at least it happened now, we know, at least once. And it says the following, it says the huts must of course be built according to well-defined rules. They must be open in some degree at least to the wind and the rain, as indeed ours was during the very rainy first days of Sukkot. And the roofs are in consequence slight, consisting usually of the branches of trees placed across rafters from which they hang fruit. The festival is the most joyous of the Jewish year. And indeed, as the Torah says, V'samachta b'chagecha, you shall rejoice in your festival, referring particularly to the festival of Sukkot. And so it gives me great joy to be able to share our Sukkah with you this year, and to wish everyone a Moadim L'Simcha, a very festive Sukkot, and as the traditional response is Chagim Uzmanim L'Sason, that we should have many more times of great celebration. And so I wish you all well, and Chag Sameach.